Hello and welcome back to the Morbid Moonlight 31 Days of Halloween, where we're taking a look through the films of horror legend Felissa Rose, one a day, every day throughout the month of October. This is the 31 Days of Felissa Rose, and today we're going to be talking about 2018's Rootwood, directed by Marcel Walz. So, Rootwood is one of those films that you can kind of describe as being in the realms of found footage, in that it's a film that uses some of maybe the language and the tropes of the subgenre, but it's not exactly a proper found footage film. It's one of a growing number of movies, including the new Halloween film, disappointingly enough, that feature podcasters as the lead characters, because it seems that we live in a world where people aren't interested in stuff if they don't have the opportunity to monetize that interest. I can't help but think that in a few years' time, all the films getting made these days that feature YouTubers and podcasters and internet reality shows are going to look pretty dated, although my main issue is that in most cases, making a film about those types of characters often means that what we get are just really crude, obnoxious cliches of talentless egomaniacs twatting about performing for fictional cameras. But thankfully, Rootwood doesn't suffer from this problem because it's managed to nail down a pretty solid and likeable cast. The premise involves the standard investigation of a local legend, in this case that of the Wooden Devil, although weirdly we're not given a huge deal of information about said Wooden Devil, which unfortunately just goes to show how interchangeable a lot of these kind of mythical folk horrors can be, especially when they're just means of sparking off running around in the woods being terrified films of the kind of sub-Blair Witch 2016 level. I think one of the weirdest things here is that our two lead characters are the hosts of a podcast called The Spooky Hour, who get contacted by a big shot Hollywood horror film producer, played of course by Felissa Rose in fucking gorgeously vampish diva mode, to go out into the woods and film a documentary, which seems kind of a strange leap. I mean, podcasts and movie making aren't really that interchangeable, and there's no immediate leap of logic that says that if you host a podcast about supernatural folklore, you're instantly going to want to go out and make a documentary. But anyway, it's basically just a case of getting these characters to do what needs to be done, and when they're out there, the usual bad stuff starts to happen. Now, it's easy to be cynical about stuff like this that's pretty unoriginal, but I don't really have a problem with that, because a lot of great films stick to a tried and tested storyline, whilst others, like, without spoiling things, Rootwood, rely on giving us a familiar series of events in order to hit us with a twist ending that offers a new spin on the material, just as we've pretty much accepted that everything's going to be very familiar. Like I said though, the good thing about Rootwood is that it's got a decent cast, including Elissa Dowling as the star. Now, Elissa Dowling is somebody that you might be familiar with from any one of a number of lower budgeted horror films. I think the most well known of which would probably be We Are Still Here. She's somebody who, like Felissa Rose, has really jumped into the world of indie horror filmmaking with both feet, and has netted herself a pretty impressive number of credits over the course of a 15-year plus career. Needless to say then, she brings talent, charisma to the part, because as well as being exceptionally busy, Elissa Dowling is also a great talent. She's also incredibly photogenic, which helps, but she manages to spearhead this film very well, and she manages to elevate things with a kind of minimalistic and very likeable performance. She's helped by Tyler Gallant and Sarah French as the rest of her documentary team of 3. Both of those two have also done quite a lot of bits and pieces, as well as both acting opposite each other in the Caroline Williams slasher thriller film Blind, which came out a few years ago. They generally do a lot of the same kind of projects. Neither of them are quite on the level of Elissa Dowling, truth be told, but they're definitely not the usual kind of annoying, shallow characters that you expect in your typical American found footage film. However, I think one of the problems is that the cast is pretty small for a film this long. It runs to about 85 minutes or so, and for at least probably about an hour of that, we've just got 3 characters, which means that the drama does feel a little bit thin, especially as this is one of those films that uses just little hints of what's to come along the way, before building to this single big revelation at the end, as opposed to a film that really sprinkles its scary scenes throughout. And there's a few slightly false frights that end up feeling a little bit like treading water, to be honest, just getting the runtime up to a decent film length, because the story is definitely on the thin side. He either needed to have a bigger cast and more drama between the characters than the pretty one-note romantic conflict that we've got here, which would allow you more kind of dramatic scenes of characters being picked off one by one, or else you simply needed to scale things back and make a shorter film by cutting out some of the flab. Because even though I do quite like the characters, and I think it's nicely filmed and pretty watchable, it's just one of those films that's unfortunately quite slight. It just doesn't really have enough going on for it for long stretches of time. When the horror stuff does come, it unfortunately slips into rather bad found footage tropes like your shaky shots of running and characters spinning around, and Blair Witch shots of breathy crying. Some of the scary stuff does work, but generally it feels hampered by the need to cut back to a found footage POV shot every now and then, which really doesn't feel earned. You can make found footage POV scary if you've taken the time to get the viewer acclimatised to seeing the film in that way, but cutting from a normally filmed film to sudden bursts of found footage just feels cheap, and like the director, Marcel Walz, doesn't quite understand why found footage is scary when done right. I think the last act or so is good, and the first act is pretty solid. I just miss out quite a bit of the middle section where not that much happens. I'd really like to get into spoilers here, but I'm not going to. But like I said earlier, I think that Felissa Rose is fucking dynamite in this one of her most enjoyable and outrageously camp performances yet. I think that when Felissa just cuts loose and gives us her full nasty side, she's really great, and you can see her really come alive in the scenes where she gets to be ultra bitchy and diva-ish. Whilst it's not what you'd necessarily consider textbook good acting, it's the kind of performance that's just a fucking joy to watch, and I just wish she'd had more to do in the film as a whole, just because she's only really around to send our podcasters off on their mission. Probably a Felissa factor I'd say of about 3 out of 10 for this one, just because her screen time is very limited, but she is great when she gets the chance to cut loose. And this film does feature probably my favourite ever line that Felissa Rose gets to deliver, just because she goes so hard on it. You'd have to see it to believe it, to be honest, but sadly I cannot play it for you right now because, well, if you've seen the film you'll know why, and if not, give it a shot and tell me she's not fucking awesome there. Which is a roundabout way of saying that I definitely would recommend Rootwood, even though there's been quite a bit of criticism. It's definitely not by any means a real cutting-edge horror film, but as a sturdy little B-movie with a fun spin on some familiar tropes, it's a good watch. I think I'd say about a 6 out of 10 for Rootwood would be fair, maybe a little bit generous, but that Felissa Rose performance really is the icing on the cake. But I think that should wrap things up here for day number 18 of the 31 Days of Felissa Rose. Thanks a lot for stopping by, and I hope that you enjoyed it. And if all goes well, we should see you back here tomorrow for day 19 of the 31 Days of Felissa Rose. Please consider subscribing, let me know what you think in the comment section, and we'll see you again next time.